Radio Spaetkauf. Berlin news in English.
It is Thursday, October 17th. We are recording Radio Spaetkauf live in front of an audience at Podigy HQ. This is a very special episode, one of our collaborations with the Europäische Akademie Berlin, where we are sitting down with some wonderful guests to think about what it is we really want out of this city and all our cities, and in this case today, the future. We're here with a wonderful live audience. Guys, thanks for joining us. Today, I've got two amazing guests here to talk to us about the topic of the future. What do we want from the city of tomorrow? Our first guest to be introduced is an architect and the founder of Studio Schwitalla, which is a research and design studio focused on experimental work at the intersection of architecture, urban mobility, and urban design. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Max Schwitalla.
Thank you for the invite. Thank you.
I'm also very, very pleased to introduce our next guest, an author whose novel Neon Grau was awarded the 2023 Kurd Latzfitz Prize for Best Novel. That was followed up by Neurobiest, a biopunk science fiction novel, which won the 2024 Kurd Latzfitz Prize. Their most recent novel, Proxy, was just released in September. Please, a very warm welcome for Aiki Mira.
Thank you. Thank you.
Max, I'm going to start with something that was a cute part of your online bio, but I didn't bring up, which is your entry into the world of urban planning came through your love of skateboarding?
As a teenager. Yes, not today anymore.
It's a sport which reuses or uses the architecture and design of the city in unpredicted ways, like the Macba in Barcelona. Is that part of how you ended up connecting to urban design?
Kind of, exactly. I mean, I didn't skate in Barcelona yet at that time. So that was 18, 19 or something, and this was when I decided to study architecture. I fell in love with architecture and urban planning because, in a way, skateboarders, they really reclaim the streets in a collective way. And I think this is, what I found fascinating. And as you describe, claiming urban spaces in a different way and reading the city through mobility, through moving to the space. And this is exactly what led me to architecture and our specialty, what we're working today with, how do we move to the cities today and in the future.
Right. Is it flying skateboards?
Oh, yeah, hopefully at some point, yes.
Oh, okay. Aika, you brought today a reading from one of your novels, and I thought it would be a really excellent jumping off point for this discussion. Is there anything we need to set this up?
Yes, basically, I'm going to read a small passage from Neurobiest, and this is about a community reclaiming the roofs of Berlin. And I'm going to read the passage where one of these persons is welcoming visitors to the roof. And he says, "Welcome to roof TN7. From up here, you can see what Berlin is really like, what makes its architecture so special. Chrome and chlorophyll. Meadows grow along polished house facades. Crops sprout on balconies. Entire forests rise on flat roofs." And one guest shouts, "Berlin does not seem as dazzling as a city in the style of the space age like Frankfurt or Cologne." "No," Canoa replies. "Berlin is a wild space that people all over the world call their home. However, the real Berlin reveals itself only when the city is not just understood purely architecturally, but as an interconnected metabolic systems similar to a biological organism. In Berlin, everything is connected to the web of life. So please stay together. All animals on roof TN7 are genetically modified. They look innocent. From my own experience, I can tell you, animals up here are cunning and organized. They love to join forces with each other. The guinea pigs with the stoic rabbits, light, beautiful animals that seem to fly while hopping. Together, they are plundering our kitchen gardens. But your gardens are secured by electric fences. Well, electric fences are no obstacles for smart animals.
Nice. Aiki, it seems like so much of like, at least like the cyberpunk kind of novels I grew up with, it was all about the underground in both like a literal way and a figurative way. Things were always at ground level and going in and out of things and crumbling buildings and sewers. Was it an intentional choice? Like, why rooftops? Was it to undermine that?
It was not intentional, but now that you're saying it, it's quite true that it's, it's the opposite of the underground. Basically, people are going on the roofs and, having their own communities there, starting with squatting there, but then they're building their new things like gardens and, animals. And in the end, the local government is tolerating it. In the end, it's basically people are getting interested into it and then visitors are coming. So it's kind of a tourist thing happening there. But yeah, it's the opposite of the underground going on the roof. And it's also the idea, like, where do we find spaces? Like, everything is cramped on the streets. All the flats are sold. There's no space to live anymore. And so, the roof seemed for me like a utopian space where, people can do stuff. And when you see a roof which is, built full of plants, it's just, it's beautiful. And it's how I imagine it. And, all these roofs where things are going on. Yeah.
It's also interesting to me that like a tour guide is introducing you to this world, very different from some sort of, I don't know, cybernetic ninja or something. Is the openness also a part of this, the culture of these roofs?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's about inclusion. So even, these communities try to do their own stuff and they're also rebellious and they're also, fighting discrimination. But they still say, we open up for visitors, and if people are interested and curious and want to, to visit us, we are open and we are welcoming them.
I mean, in a way, I mean, that's sort of what was like when, I got to the city, I'm now considered like I've lived here for a while, but, Tacolis, things that are now no longer existing, the squats then also had a sort of vibrant and welcoming feel to them, which like I feel like is reflected in that sort of something old is new again. Max, several of the designs that I looked at that your studio has produced look to the skies also, sort of inverted buildings or Babel. Do you see, I can't remember the name of the piece, there was some of your buildings that were growing...
The village.
The village.
V-shaped village.
Okay, so can you talk about why you're also looking upwards?
No, because when you talked, we told the story right now, I was thinking, of course, there was images of like Singapore coming up and like green facades, green roofs, something that's, sometimes the future is already there. It's just not unequally distributed, and I mean, like, this is partly already happening. And, you ask yourself, like, why are we not like, why are we not able to do such things in Berlin, for example? And one aspect of that is, how do we get there? How is the privacy in public spaces? How do we separate them in cities? And this is something what we work on through the lens of transportation, mobility. So, for example, today you look at how do you get home or how do you get to your roof garden? You take your car, you drive into the underground parking, you take the elevator, go upwards, and that's this is the usual way we produce cities today. And New York wouldn't be possible without the elevator. LA looks like LA because of the car. So it's always a certain mobility concept that is shaping our spatial environment.
So mobility within a building, not just...
Yeah, but I mean, if you think about New York, every trip in a city starts or ends with an elevator. So it's a part of a mobility chain in an urban context. So I would say vertical mobility is very important in that realm as well. And accessing public spaces maybe on the rooftop. So this is exactly what we are interested in our work. How do we actually start to not just multiply private spaces in the city, because then you also have a disbalance between public space and private spaces. Where do all people actually meet? There is no place for social interaction anymore, because you put more and more private space into the city and you put more and more people, but they can't really meet anymore.
And so how does the village reimagine this vertical transportation?
So the idea with the village was basically, how do we fold basically elevators? You have tilted elevators, so it becomes this kind of continuous chain where you could go basically, like, it's not a dead end, a vertical dead end as we see today with elevators, but it's a continuous loop basically. And so yeah, transportation and inside buildings, outside buildings.
So like a Ferris wheel, or we still have some of these in Germany, these elevators which loop and you can step into and off of.
Oh, Paternoster, that's
yeah.
Unfortunately they're not allowed anymore, which is a shame. No, but it's the idea that you're basically the idea that the elevators, they merge, they meet again at the top and then they go back down. So it's not one continuous loop where you get off and you can board again, like continue the travel in a three-dimensional way, not just a one-dimensional way, in a three-dimensional way.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, it makes sense, but only because I watched a lot of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I think I'm familiar with the Jeffries tube. You mentioned Singapore as like, and this is something where people are like, oh, well, this is the city of the future. But it's now, and so it brings in, I think, a lot of today's problems. It's built on borderline slave labor. The spaces that are amazing are for the wealthy, and it's going on the edges of a very limited space. So it relies on, I don't know how you even grow enough food to feed Singapore without. I mean, there's urban gardening or vertical gardens or that sort of thing, but Aiki, when we look at a future, like how important is it in your ideas about a changing culture and not just changing technologies?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, changing cultures and also about our imagination. Like when we all close our eyes now and think the word city, we have a certain image. And I think that's, also part of what literature and art has to do is like expand this image and give us new ideas and new ways of thinking about what a city could be. And I think, it is, for example, the physicist Karen Barrett said that, everything that exists emerged from a relationship. So the doing is always, before the thing. So basically to think about a city as doings, as relationships, as people relating to each other and, different cultures coming together and maybe clashing as well. I mean, that's, what I think when I think about the city. And it's not about, dead buildings. Like a building doesn't make a city. Like people planning cities and just building lots of things, like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, like smart cities. But in the end, this is not a city because there's no one living there. There are no artists in there. There's no infrastructure, no life going on. It's more like a showroom for new technologies.
A phrase you've used in your writing is a anthropocentric city. That's so I have two questions. Like what is a post-anthropocentric city, and how important it is to introduce new vocabulary to our discussions of the future?
Yeah, well, post-anthropocentric, basically anthropocentric is like the human is in the center, and post means to overcome this and think about, like when I, for example, say people, not only to mean humans, but only non-humans, and to think that in a city there are, humans living, but plants and animals and machines and artificial intelligence, and, how do these entities relate to each other? And to make it post-anthropocentric means to think about all these entities and also think about, are there hierarchies already in there? Like an example would be, we just talked about like cities are built with hierarchies, like the car is like the main mobility factor. But if you think about, the future and make it post-anthropocentric, then we think about where are animals living? How do they move around the city? And how do we want to move around the city? Maybe use bicycles as well, not only cars and, this kind of things.
How do we do a better job, or how in your novels do we do a better job of incorporating animal life into the city?
Just examples, for example. Well, in Neurobiest, it was mentioned in the passage that there are lots of animals, and they are there, and they have, they are basically part of the thinking of the community. They are anticipating them, and also. Maybe this is not a good example, but in the novel, they are also genetically modifying the animals to be, for example, climate resistant, and thinking about, how can they live in this new climate world and with the climate crisis and things like this. And in reality now there are examples. I think Donna Haraway mentioned it in one book, for example, about pigeons having little rucksacks and, for example, measuring the air pollution and things like this. So, actually having this companion species, she's calling them, living together with animals in the city. And
Max, a word I learned from you is polycentric as a way of designing cities. What does that mean?
I mean, it came from our thinking about how do we again move in different neighborhoods within the neighborhoods, but also between the neighborhoods. And Berlin was always, for example, came out of two neighborhoods, Berlin and Neukölln, and they grew in a polycentric way. We have very diverse neighborhoods, and it's this organism. And I think how do you describe it as well was really resonates a lot, like in the way we think about cities as well, as a organism of polycentric organized neighborhoods, and not this centralistic way of one center and a periphery. We still have the issue of the periphery in Berlin as well, but there is this idea of a polycentric. And for me, it's also in a way a very European idea of a city. Like is
it better than a centric?
100%. Yeah. For
monocentric?
Sure. Polycentric. Everything, the more the merrier. No, so the idea of a polycentric city allows more diversity and inclusion for that. So for me, it's definitely a better city in that sense.
Because people can find a center for them? Is that what that means?
Yes, exactly. Find community, but also maybe the diversity in the others in a way, right? So I think this is for me definitely like something we should achieve.
Does it by decentralizing or polycentralizing a city? Does that lead to segregation?
No, I think it's about like different grades of interconnectivity. So you have basically, now let's talk about transportation again quickly.
Right.
How do we make sure that we have a public transportation network that combines those neighborhoods well together? And then we have the first and the last mile as a big opportunity to design spaces, the in-between space in cities that is actually for social interaction. That is should turn from a death zone that we have right now in the streets. You don't want to send out your kids there because there's cars,
right,
running them over. So like, how do we, transform them into spaces for social interaction again?
Right.
And I think this is another big opportunity to think. If we think polycentric, then you have this first and last mile concept where you go by foot, you go by bicycles and so on, shared systems, and you can turn the space between our built infrastructure in a social interaction space.
The last miles in Berlin are very, very different from different parts of the periphery, right? You've got very wealthy periphery where that last mile is a car, but it also then turns into all the miles. And you've got a periphery that has a higher density and lower income, but is also very, very poorly served in those last miles. Are there futuristic transport models that make sense for both of those?
Yeah, I mean, we are working a lot in this. It's a buzzword called mobility hub. Everybody speaks about mobility hub, the solution of
it's like the sort of thing you see on a white sheet,
exactly,
but also not in reality.
No, but actually, I think this has a big chance of like helping that intermodal transportation systems where you have a first and last mile system, and then in between the bigger leap between the neighbors. And the mobility hub is a space where basically these different mobility systems come together in one spot, in one architecture, which is not only maybe, it's not an interaction or intersection of mobility systems. It capitalizes on the fact that you have a lot of people there.
Right.
So you actually turn it into like a Quartierszentrum, into like a social interaction space that can become the new hub in a neighborhood.
Right,
basically.
like Cottbusser Tour.
Yeah. Well, I mean, well.
I mean, that's a space where you're right. It's an intersection of several bus lines, and it was designed, I think, with that in mind. Right, there was a concentration of residences and businesses around various lines, but the outcome of it hasn't been 100% successful socially. So, what is it? How do you make a space that's fun? And I guess that maybe ties back to the idea of skateboarding or whatever.
Yeah.
Does the future need to be fun to be successful?
Well, I hope so. No, I guess. In a way, the human scale, I think, is something we should then talk about. And this is something Cottbusser Tor maybe lacks a little bit. You have, and I mean, Cottbusser Tor is more than the train station and the bus lines. They have this surrounding situations, the massive. Like housing blocks that lack social scale, human scale, I think. And this is for me, the crucial aspect we should never forget when planning. We have the big picture planning, but we should really always remember the small scale, the human scale. Like details matters, materials matters, color matter, lighting matters. How do we generate or make architecture urban spaces that are actually that are inviting, that are make people feel safe at any time of the day. And this is a design task we have to face, and that's maybe not always the cheapest way. But I think we should value that, and that this is really important for our cities.
So there was a time in Berlin's past and in the future in Neurobiest where it was really on individuals or small communities to make these new spaces that were welcoming. Is in Neurobiest, is it rely on individuals and small communities in this vision of the future to make these green spaces, these intersections for communities, or is there a way that it can be promoted?
Yes, it's definitely starting with communities and little steps, but it also shows the potential that it can grow and get onto different levels, like thinking about giving forest rights and things like this. So this is also a topic there. But yeah, I think it's happening, and what was said earlier, that things are already there, they are here, and like the future is not equally dispersed, but it's already happening, and this is also what drives me when I'm writing, that I think there's so many things happening already, and communities are doing stuff all over the world, and so one task is also to make this a little bit more visible with literature, hallucinating it, of course, in science fiction, but also show that there are lots of micro-utopias are happening in a city as well when we look for them. And yeah, micro-utopia is actually a word which comes more from the art context, but it's very useful for cities. And there is actually was an exhibition just until September in Nairobi, Kenya, and it called Hakuna Utopia, and where they had a map. It's an art exhibition, and an interactive map of Nairobi, where there are lots of showing the places where are the micro utopias in Nairobi. Basically, communities doing utopian stuff, experimental stuff, like maybe a free food store or a library, or just like new spaces. And I bet when you look in Berlin for it, you will find these micro-utopias.
Is there a micro-utopia that's inspired you here in Berlin?
In Berlin?
Or on Earth?
Yeah, on Earth. Yeah, I think all the time. I mean, I'm reading stuff. I'm a lot in Berlin, and I live in Hamburg. And I mean, when I see like street art as well and little things, can inspire me all the time. Yeah.
When it comes to something like street art or a free library, maybe that's popped up on a street outside of a building or something like that, there's going to be pushback from someone, a cranky neighbor, someone who painted that wall or repainted it again and again, like my Hausmeister. I think he enjoys painting over it as much as people enjoy doing the graffiti. So everyone's winning. But when we imagine a micro-utopia becoming more macro, like, is there space for people who don't like anything new, who don't want new technologies? How do we incorporate them?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, I would love it. I would hate a utopia which is like only for polite and easygoing people. I would love to have this also, the grumpy people in there who say, no, I hate this, it's about inclusion. I mean, that's, for me, it's utopian, and it's also something queer for me to think about inclusion as a concept, and also think about all the the voices who say no and don't want to be part of it. Yeah.
How radically I mean, are we inclusive of xenophobes and I mean, is there a space in our perfect future for literally everyone?
Well, then you have to, differentiate between of course, what people are doing, and if it's, hurting other people, then of course you have to talk about it, but you can't exclude a human being, because, you have to deal with, with other beings. But of course, you have to establish your own rules as a community and say, this is what we want, and, we hope you we go by these rules, and we don't want to be hurt, and we want to have respect, and you have to establish these rules. But it's not about leaving people out, or you still have to deal with it and to find a way how you can deal with with people who dissent.
Yes, Max?
We were just talking before about some micro-utopias from Tokyo, for example, and speaking about inclusion and grumpy people, for example, we have these in Germany when you have the sound of the pedestrian walkways, like tak 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 tak. It's really painful. Like it's terrible. In Tokyo, it's like actually it's little birds singing. Doot, 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 like
like the crosswalk to let people know.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So like, it's for me it's a beautiful micro utopia that says like how do we humanize our our urban environments, and how do we actually make things with there's a little smile comes up when you hear this, and it's not this tak tak tak. It doesn't have to be like this technical and painful. It can be actually beautiful and cute and like.
They did that in my hometown. They changed the crosswalk sound from like a buzz to a bird, and people hated it. They were up in arms. I think even the birders were like, well, that's not the right kind of bird. Or it was the right kind. It was going to confuse. Can't remember, but I think change will always be resisted. When we're looking at growth, does it always, a lot of the cities of the future, it's going upwards and upwards, or it's flight, or it's what was a small city becomes an even bigger city. Do the cities of the future, do we have to look outside of the boundaries of the 20 biggest cities we already have? Do we have to start thinking about how smaller cities are going to become bigger, or cities can grow in other ways?
Maybe to jump out on this. So obviously we're talking about growth the whole time since a couple of years now. But it's interesting to see, we're getting less and less kids. Germany has 1.6 kids per woman at the moment, the US as well. Most nations in the world actually are starting to shrink. And actually the whole world population is peaking in around 60 years. So until then, obviously, we're dealing with growth and massively, and we have to cope that, and we have to work with that. But it's also like it's not forever like this, and I think this is we should remind us about that it's not forever. Like growth is not going to continue forever. There is a
wait. That's we need that. That's how capitalism works. That's Everything's got to be bigger and fat. Wait, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Well,
and I think, but also, even as populations change, will cities stop growing? Because we've seen a shift where there's no one left, even to farm the food for the cities. Sorry, but not to completely derail your thought.
So so the idea is basically, we all, the science, agree that in around 60 years, 2080, somehow there's a peak, and we don't know yet how fast it's gonna go down again. And there was this simulation, or I read about this article saying let's take 1.6 kids per woman, and then let's see what's gonna happen. That means in 200 years we're back to 2 billion people. That's a crazy thought, because then actually, why are we building? For who are we building all these cities at the moment in the next 80 years that we won't need in 200 years from now? And cities should be thought in a time span of 200, 300 years.
Why is that?
No, well, it's massive cost, it's massive infrastructure, it's a big, it's a big endeavor to build cities. It's not something you do for just 20 years and then we tear them down again.
Although we've built a lot of cities in 20 years, the last 20 years.
We did. All I'm asking for, I want to remind us that we should think of building cities also in a reverse way. Maybe how do we build them back later? And that leads to a circular construction method that is anyway more sustainable and more healthy for the planet.
What's circular construction?
So the idea that you don't just build and you don't care about it anymore, you actually care about how do you tear it down again. So instead of gluing it, you screw it and you can unscrew it again.
This was I just recently watched the Lego movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was the theory behind that. Is if you don't glue the Legos together, you can change things. But that will never change. What about the footprint of a city? So you look at, I was really born in Detroit. It's empty now. We can't serve, there's no services for the city.
That's a fantastic example, because also that was laid out for the car. So it's a massive urban sprawl based on car transportation. And that is proved to be not sustainable for the future. So density is important at the moment to incorporate future degrowth again, I think. So definitely it's a good example how we should not do it. We see that now Detroit is like getting popular again because there's people claiming the city and farming is coming back to the city, so it's a new model of like maybe like how does the hinterland and the city come together closer. But I think it's a good model that should remind us of how it should not become for the future.
Aiki, you talk a lot about, or you've written essays about queer sci-fi, and I wonder if like a queer future, or if there's a way to build a city that is queer, can infrastructure itself be queer? And I don't know if that's like if that makes any sense as a question, but I do look at some designs even in Max's portfolio where I'm like, well, that's not how I'm used to seeing a building, and why is it in a circle? Why is it upside down? Is that still a building? So my question is, I guess, is a queer future have queer infrastructure?
Probably, and then the question is, what is queer? And for me, it's more than identities or sexualities. It's also about relations, like polyamorous, or thinking about how, for example, friends growing old together instead of couples, and things like this would be queer. And then a queer infrastructure probably would be something which is fluid and open for new ways of relating to each other, and also something, which is not stuck or done, but what you already said, Max, which is very interesting, like thinking about also how, to change it, like to build something, but also with the idea, how can I take it down later or change it? I think that's, for me, a very queer concept because it's about fluidity. And when we think about the queer flag, I mean, there are already so many identities, but we know it's not going to stop,
Right.
It's ever becoming, expanding. And this is also what I think is queer, like thinking about infrastructure, which is always able to adapt and to be fluid and to be new and different, and people can, and it actually empowers people to participate in it and inclusion, of course, to take new identities into it and new relations.
So to build fluidly is sort of the only way to future-proof a building, because if you right now we see people designing things in Berlin with an attitude from 5 years ago where it was about commercial, it was pre-pandemic, whatever, and now we've got empty commercial spaces and not enough residential, and no way to sort of easily change that. Or we see these other things where it's, I mean, I don't know what queer architecture would look like, but I look at these brutalist remnants, and that just feels whatever the opposite of of futuristic thinking or utopian thinking. Although maybe I'm not being fair to those buildings.
Exactly, and queer infrastructure is not only, I think, about buildings and stuff, but it's also about having bars and places to go. And so when we think about, for example, queer infrastructure, it could also be like I just read recently, and it is happening now already, but it's a very cool thing also, is in London they're thinking about, neuro-inclusive clubbing scene, like, including neurodivergent people, being neurodiverse in the clubbing scene, and think about how do we build rooms, for example, at a club event, which is, inclusive for these people. Like they, for example, thought about the concept of a chaos room where, people can overload in senses, have a overload, but also about, when people don't want it and just want to have one sense inspired during a clubbing night, and these concepts, and this would also be for me a queer infrastructure. Thinking about this.
Yeah, could a city have a quiet? Like I've seen quiet rooms at parties now where it's like, please don't talk to anyone, even if they really look like they want to be talked to. Like this is just chilling out. And the first time I saw it, I was like, well, that's not a. I was like, okay, yeah, no, that sounds nice. And I went there eventually. But yeah, and for either of you, can we build these sort of spaces?
Yeah, I mean, like I was thinking about how could a queer infrastructure, look like, but I'm hesitant to say like, there must a design look to it. It's more like I think design strategies such as fluidity, adaptability, inclusion, diversity. That's all like, if you think about these words, obviously like, images pop up that have nothing to do with a monotonous facade, and like, it's all the same, and like, think about Côte Busator, like the massive buildings. Like there's nobody, like you can't express yourself in their structures. And I think this is something that we should maybe enable. And like we are thinking about a concept like we call it the urban shelf. It's like a support structure, but that it allows where people can actually build their own little, units into it. So you could even think that this is a very diverse looking structure because, it enables even self-built systems or like modular housing systems.
Okay. So this is like a framework of a building, and
yeah. I mean, like it's actually something. There's an example in South America, a couple of examples where like the old high-rise buildings that weren't finished, they were like the squatters came in and they actually started to build their own stuff, which is a beautiful, it's a top-down strategy and a bottom-up strategy combined in a built, environment. And I think if we learn from them, and obviously we don't want to build slums, but I'm like, how could we learn from these strategies and like actually come up with new design and building,
Right. So we've seen how these kind of communities can flourish in capitalism's failures, but is a capitalism-based infrastructure compatible with a future where people can express themselves individually?
I mean, I think that we actually, for example, Corona taught us a lot to, rethink. I think these strategies as well. I mean, we are now facing so much office space empty standing around. We're realizing, at least in the architecture and real estate environment, we're understanding that it's not, like this one market-driven portfolio that we built today, and that should stay like this. We know that adaptability is part of it, and that is more expensive to build in the beginning. Flexibility is more expensive than monofunctionality. But I think this is something we are starting to, we are gönnen uns. We're trying to incorporate that. So I think we're understanding that this is, the costs are higher, but the long run, the flexibility is more valuable.
No, I understand what you're saying. I just you understanding that is very different from the the people hoarding space for profit. Aiki, you also wanted to jump in there on this notion of capitalism in the future.
Yeah, capitalism, of course. And you talked earlier, Max, about the difference about public and private spaces, and I think that's very interesting. And because at the moment, what is also happening is that, millionaires, crypto millionaires are trying to build their utopian cities, and they call them free cities, but they're basically private cities, which, is like hyper capitalism. And one example was, maybe you heard of it, Prospera. It's in Honduras called, you can translate it in prosperous, and, trying to have their own private city with their, building society from scratch with their own, private education, and everything is private, and the people who have the most to say are those people who own the most, and basically they don't have to pay tax, they don't have to respect work rights there, and now they have a local pushback from the new government. But this is happening everywhere in the world, that people are trying to build these free cities as like capitalist cities. Another example would be in Norway. There's the city, it's called Liberstad, which means free city, and they don't use the word capitalism, they call it voluntarism, and they say tax is like forcing people to pay tax, and they have their private ground and community, and the government let them experiment with it and say you can try out different alternatives. They have in Liberstad, they have a city coin, which is like a cryptocurrency, and they're experimenting with it. So,
wow.
These things are happening, and it's, a different type of utopia. So it's always, the question, whose utopia is it? It's not mine.
And this is this idea of an island too. Like this is sort of so often the utopias we've imagined in the past have been these bubbles, these islands. Oh, it's outside is the wasteland or whatever. How do we make? Is there a future we can imagine where the utopia is not centralized around wealth and power and bubbles?
Yeah, I think we have to start with these micro-utopias. In this, in our dirty cities, we have to, to do little things and start there building stuff, and not this, either it's just an idea, this utopia, which never realized, or it's just, this, what you call islands. I mean, these are capitalist islands. They don't want to connect with the, the other all around them with poverty. They just want to, live in their cages and connect with the next free city and the next capitalist city, and they definitely want to stay isolated islands.
I think there's an interesting idea about this expressing publicly your spaces. Like if you live in a beautiful building, you don't have the view of the beautiful building. Like and I think that's an aspect of Brutalist architecture where it's maybe not designed for the people who are outside it, except for the weirdos, for the very nice people who think that that's beautiful. I'm sorry, I have a huge bias there, and I'm trying to work on it. And again, when we talk about underground communities, things that spotted up where there was nothing else, or in the darkness, or in the clubs where people needed privacy to express themselves. How do we balance a utopia that's open and inclusive while giving people space? How do we allow people to express them, to design the city for other people to look at, right? I mean, that's sort of an anti-capitalist, or at least it doesn't fit into our current frameworks where, it's up to people like graffiti artists to repaint the city to make it more interesting. And we're living in a Berlin today where like our micro-utopias are being stamped out pretty thoroughly. So how do we design a city for expression, or do you have something like that in your portfolio?
Well, I think all the topics you just talked about is architecture is just one little piece in there. Like, I mean, there's so much governance, all these, aspects that are important, maybe even more important than designing spaces. It's one part, but I mean, like, for example, this idea of this urban shelf where people actually, you can combine top-down and bottom-up strategies that allow people to express themselves in such environments. It's one idea. This example, I just passed by Amazon Tower here, right, on the way here with my bicycle. So that's like the totem of this evil capitalist coming to Kreuzberg, Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg, sitting there in this, very massive tower. Mm-hmm. And everything about this, would we agree on, is probably didn't went so well.
No, yeah,
Right. So, and I think it's beautiful to see that this happens, and the city learns from it as well. And Berlin now has a Hochhausleitlinie, so they give recommendations how to build skyscrapers in the future in Berlin, and they learn from their mistakes basically. And they say, very important, public space in the lobby, or like on the ground floor, a public space on the rooftop, and that means public and not just controlled public, but so you have to have access to it. So there is things that we like learn from these mistakes. So I'm trying to stay positive and say like, yes, sometimes we need to hit the bottom to become better. Something that Rotterdam, for example, did, a city that really, hit the spatial ground and now is reinventing itself. So sometimes maybe we have to hit the bottom before it gets better again. Maybe.
I mean, the skyscraper sort of goes against what a lot of Berlin, the reason why Berlin is so spread out and many things, or the reason why a lot of neighborhoods work polycentrically, is that we stopped at 5 or 6 stories, 7, depending on how many, like that was a rule, and included then by necessity or by tradition mixed use. So there was always throughout much of the city commercial on the ground floor and above it thing, and keeping it flat and spread out worked for a long time. But again, I don't know if that works when we start shrinking or not. Do we need skyscrapers, Aiki?
I don't know. I think that, even this Amazon Tower, I actually have a friend who really likes it and thinks it's really cyberpunk. So, whatever. Yeah. I think I could imagine anything that people, like or don't like. So
I find, it does. There's an element to it where I'm like, there's a very Philip K. Dick thing happening here. Like I can picture a flying car going around it, policing my thoughts or whatever, or selling me things that I didn't know I wanted yet. Yeah. And it has there's actually some weird optical illusions as you walk across Warschauer, which I feel like they were maybe trying to be inclusive of everybody wandering home from the clubs. It is kind of trippy to look at. So, obviously it also looks like it was built by the empire. Do you? Yeah.
So I just want to say I can't give a definite answer to this, and I think micro-utopias are also, this is one of their thing is that they always give indefinite solutions. I mean, they're always experiments, and that's what I like also with writing. You have a little experiment going on there. I don't come from a place of authority and say, I know what's right and wrong, but it's more like, let's see what's happening. Let's see it as an experiment. And then also, like you said with Rotterdam, everything went wrong, but in the end, they built new stuff from it. So, let's attempt things but not coming from, this place of authority.
Yeah.
I know what the future looks like. I know what's good or wrong, but just, try it out. And if you make mistakes, then, we start from there.
We've talked sort of more about the sort of social, softer side of your writing but there's a lot of technologies, futuristic technologies, and like, which are the ones that you feel like most excited for the future with them? Whether it comes to how humans are evolving or the spaces, like what are the technologies you'd love to see be part of our world from your novels?
Yeah, well, I really love synthetic biology. That's when I read like papers from it, it really reads like science fiction. What they try to do, building cells from scratch. That's why I'm very interested in this. I think it's very exciting what could happen there. And for my writing mind, of course, it's very inspiring to hallucinate about this kind of thing. Yeah.
Reshaping what humans are, is that,
for example,
important to being post-anthropocentric?
Yeah, I'm very open to that. I think this is another thing which I think combines well with queer is about bodies transitioning and bodies changing. So yeah, I think it's exciting, interesting, without judging it.
Yeah, it's an interesting inversion of like basically the oldest science fiction trope, right? I mean, I don't know if officially Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is the first science fiction, but she said, oh, well, we're going to modify this, we're going to create life or modify this life, and it, it doesn't end well. It's interesting that now, 150 years later, I can't do the math, that your novels kind of take an opposite approach to the doctor's creations, or that allows people to be more experimental with biology. Is that something you did intentionally, or obviously you weren't trying to talk about Frankenstein, but is it important that we start letting go of our notion of how humans need to be for the future?
Yes, I think, I'm very open about towards this idea. And I agree with you that Mary Shelley for me is also like the grandmother of science fiction. And like, yeah, and today I think it's more like if it empowers us to do, things, to monster ourselves, I'm up for it. I think it's very interesting and exciting, like to know how it empowers ourselves, how, what relations it makes possible. Yeah. And
when we look at these futures that are queer, or we look at our present, we look at our micro-utopias, how do we think about moving them to the mainstream without them losing something? Is there something in subversion or something in minority experience that doesn't translate when we try and multiply it and grow it to a macro-utopia? Like, is there something lost when we scale?
I'm not sure. I think that, what is like the macro-utopia? Is it like what we think now is normal? It's just one experience as well. I think, I'm having a difficulty with, saying, yeah, because it seems to be a marginalized perspective. It can't be a macro-utopia. But if you think about it, like each of us has, their own perspectives. Mm-hmm. But we always decide, as a society, or that, one perspectives are like the main thing. But maybe these things are, changing, and it's also like the narrative is changing. Like we used to have narratives where there is like one hero, and it's this white male cis male guy who's rescuing everyone. But if you change our narrative and say there's a collective, there's a team, and there are different perspectives, rescuing the world, then we have this all. That this could be our macro-utopia, and it could be very inclusive for everyone, and we don't have like this one perspective on top of the hierarchy, like the human or the man or whatever, but we have like a collective of, a bag full of different perspectives.
Right. Teamwork makes the dream work, to dumb it down. Max, what about you? Technologies that you'd love to see exist to integrate into our lives?
You said it before, the hoverboard, of course.
Okay.
For that. For sure. 3D printing has a huge potential to, come up with adaptable structures that can change over time as well. That makes them more sustainable for that reason. So yeah, more electric, small-scale vehicles, maybe covered at some point, rain protected, but like more biodiversity in our cities, more architecture. There's more organic materials, recycled. So the list is long.
Right.
I think, but
those sound all like technologies except for hoverboards, things that we really have access to already.
Yeah, I mean, like I think it's also not always about high tech. Sometimes also like we unlearn to build with clay. The most sustainable building material we have. Well, I mean, like sometimes low tech solutions are also makes a lot of sense. We don't have to always go super high tech and expensive. It's a matter because labor costs are so expensive. That's why we went into this technocratic kind of solutions. But there's other solutions as well.
You're talking about like rebar and concrete takes fewer people. Is that what you mean by the labor?
Yeah, exactly. But I think most importantly for me is also it's not the idea of a city and the urban future is for me still the idea of a serendipity idea. The city is a promise for finding your luck, your better job, your love for the future, and all these. That's a city. Why? That's why we would come to cities, right? I mean, why do we move to cities? And so for me, how do we foster that serendipity moments? How do we generate these in a city? And that has implication about urban space.
But I asked the questions here. Yeah. So what's the answer?
How
do we? Because like you said, we want these intersections of transit that people go to and enjoy themselves and each other. How do we do that though? What's missing from cities today?
Well, I mean, like from a transportation point, for a viewpoint, definitely we should get rid of the private car. That's the biggest fuck up for our cities because they have to be parked, they have to be driven every day because you bought them, so you don't choose a different mode of transportation. That's the first step we have to overcome. So and this leads to the idea of an intermodal system, and that leads to that space for social interaction in our neighborhoods. So
people really like their cars.
Yeah,
they love them. I think.
Who owns a car in this space?
This is a very self-selected audience. All right. So according to our statistical model, only 10% of Berliners own cars. Yeah. Actually, might be true. I'm not sure. But none of them were proudly raising their hands, but they could read the room. So I think part of the question is like, how do we give people something that they like or love? Because I think as long as we're still just saying we're going to take it away, we're going to take it away, whether it's, whatever it is people love, and people love a lot of stuff that's not good for them or the world. But what are we going to give them in its place?
Well, I mean, like it's very simple, to be honest. Safe bike lanes, for example. Start with that. Simple answer is that. I asked my mom, why don't you use a bike in Berlin? She said, I'm too scared, with all the cars. Okay, so let's give them bike lanes. Why not? That's a very simple. It's a human right in a city to come from A to B in a safe environment on a bike. Right. There's no discussion around that. So,
but a bicycle is not really inclusive of a lot of people. That doesn't just mean about different levels of ability or transit. Like sometimes you need to just go somewhere with a few children or a bus, or you need to do. It's always deliveries become the big thing, or it's Sometimes you just don't. You poor balance. Like how do we offer bike spaces to everyone?
Well, I mean, like kids now learn biking with these walk wheels already. Like
the Laufrad,
we had a bobby car. That was a car.
Yeah.
Now they have a Laufrad wheel. Yeah. So it starts very early, I think. And like today, the mom and her kid was coming towards me. It's just a matter of on a bike lane, just to widen it up, make enough space for it. If you are maybe not so. Easy going on two wheels, you get three wheels, so you're more comfortable with that. So
I'm just I sweat very easily and profusely.
Then you get an electric motor, and then it's easy, simple as that. So I think there is in this human scale mobility, micro-mobility, there's a huge potential that makes our city more inclusive, more diverse, more livable, more beautiful, more silent, all of these things.
And there are actually startups now having bikes with roofs as well for people who don't like to get wet.
Yeah, I'm not gonna bike in the rain or at night. I can't see well enough. to see that. But then again, if the lanes were wide and
well lit, and maybe, you know, like suddenly the roof comes out. If it's rain, it's protected. Why not like an inflatable something that covers the bike lane? You know, why not thinking in these ways? Yeah,
yeah. I mean, sure.
or science fiction, no? Let's you know.
Yeah. There's just a couple of things that like we didn't quite get to yet, and one of these things I want to address is this notion of animals in green in the space, and I want to go back to that and talk about like where can we start with that, but also what's the extreme version of that? Like, how do we rebuild what's been lost in the Amazon or wherever, and how do we think about a city that's not just roof gardens? Like, how do we really? I mean, we were fighting over what to do with Tempelhof in Berlin and whether or not we put a forest in part of it or a garden, and all of that's, you know, even just community gardens can be difficult to maintain or keep or to regreen a city. So what allows us to radically regreen or reanimal a city, or what happens in the imagined world?
I think the thing is we already have. I mean, I read that in Berlin there are 20,000 pigeons, and in Paris 25,000 pigeons. I mean, we have lots of animals in the cities, and maybe just to make us more aware of them, to think about where do they actually live, what spaces do we give them, and, you know, these kind of things where, you know, there's already a lot of there, and we just have to, you know, to get to it and to relate to it in a way, and, you know,
appreciating what's there.
Yeah, and to do stuff with it. I mean, we could do much more with that, you know, with all these animals around us. I think so. And then, you know, just doing little steps like building new gardens, you also attract more insects, and, you know, things are happening. So a libelle, I don't know the English word for it, the other day in Hamburg a couple of times, and I was really amazed because I haven't seen them for years.
What?
Does anyone know the English word for libelle? Dragonfly,
Dragonfly.
And they're really beautiful.
Wait, what is it in German?
Libelle.
What is? Okay, no, that doesn't. Does that mean something? Is that a compound word of some kind?
No,
or is it
it's
just,
not like dragonfly.
It's just poetic. It's just some syllables.
But the only poetic German words
Okay.
compared to other ones.
Well, I think dragonflies deserve. Although dragonfly is also a very evocative word. I won't. I'll libella. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I love our foxes. I saw one of the largest, most healthy foxes I've ever seen in my life running around a construction site yesterday, and I was like, I needed to stop the people around me, and they were like, "No, it's safe." I'm like, "No, I know it's safe. It's cool." But you know, and we have foxes because someone decided to hunt them and populate the city with them. So I don't know. Maybe it's the zoo. Just open the gates to the zoos and let them run around. Max, yeah.
I read that ticks are more frequent in cities now than in the countryside, because simply they have, you know, more humans to chew on, basically. So in Tigan, you find more ticks than...
Great. That's like one thing. Like, I didn't have to worry about living in a city.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys go to the country, there's ticks there. I don't want to go to the country. Now there's more of them here.
Yeah, I mean, you know, from an architectural point, obviously, roof gardens, no-brainer. Facade spaces, no-brainer. Like, you can, like, activate. And not just, like, you know, plant it from, like, or plant and, like, install, but also... You know, everyone has a balcony. Like everyone can contribute to that green city, basically, from a small scale, but also from the big scale.
But that's very hard to maintain, and that puts a lot of. I mean, I don't have time to. I mean, I've tried my garden many times. There's a lot of dead plants back there.
Yeah, but I mean, like, hopefully other people are a bit more. You know, I'm
right.
also on your boat as well.
Yeah.
But
so,
I mean, like, I hope not everyone is like
right.
Like me.
I mean, like Or we've now seen in Berlin where they're putting these sort of like pop-up gardens where there used to be cars parked, and I love that as a symbol. But also, they're not doing great. You know, there's routes getting crowded. It takes a lot of gardeners. Like who's gonna maintain these roofs, and you know, and there's, you know, Singapore has a lot of green buildings, but I don't know who those gardeners are, and I don't want to ask. So is this something again where is this dependent on technology? Is this dependent on us moving past how we pay people or how people spend their time? Like how do we keep a city green without a lot of people doing a lot of gardening?
I mean, yeah, robots going to come into play for sure. Robots going to help us, yes. And I think again it's a matter of scale. Maybe the one plant you were referring to. this pot is maybe, I don't know if it really, if it owned by someone, not owned in the sense of like I own it, but like I identify it's, it's part of my, environment. So I think if we manage, in a bottom up way, I think it is doable. I think it's, maybe not everyone is like you and me, not having a green, thumb. I think I believe that there's other people who would.
Yeah. Sure.
And robots.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I also think my backyard is the soil has been poisoned at some point in the city's history because people warned me when I moved in, nothing will grow there. And I was like, I'll do it. I'll grow a lawn. And they were like, no, they live there for generations.
And maybe it's also a change of culture, like our attitude towards us. Like if you think about, saying I don't have the time, then, it's like, what do I spend my time with? And, instead of, for example, doing stuff on my smartphone or media, maybe, this new culture of growing things can relax me. It's like part of my schedule to say I did some computer work and now I want to do some public gardening, and there I'm meeting my neighbors and I have a good time, and it's like part of this thing to do it like an hour a week, and I have social contact, and I do something with my hands, because normally I do lots of virtual stuff working. So this could be like a cultural change as well, which is necessary, which we probably should start with then in education in schools and with the kids, to get them there to say that gardening even in the city is like part of my life. I do it once, like I do sport or something.
Yeah. But Aiki, it sounds like you're suggesting that I would grow a beautiful plant and then not post about it on Instagram. Is that seems insane? That seems silly. Well, that's. Should we just let my dad FaceTime during the podcast? I'm tempted to just let him on. You know what? What's the worst that could happen? He did study urban planning for a while, but let's see. Hopefully this call failed. Sorry, guys. That was a very exciting moment about to happen there. I think that's. Oh no, he's calling again. All right. Let's see what happens here. Hey, how's it going? I'm in the middle of a podcast with an audience here. We can't hear you, but let's see what happens now. Can we hear you now? No, we still can't hear you. Oh, there we go. So I can hear you now.
Okay, hi Dan.
Hi. You're on me. I don't know where the speakers are on this thing. So here's the question. How do you imagine the city of the future?
How do I imagine the city of the future? I imagine it without me in it.
Okay, wait, that sounded really dark. Let's just say you're never gonna die, because that's the future I'm imagining. Okay, so obviously in the future my parents don't die. What would the cities be like that you would want to live in?
I think they'd be like Flintstones and flying cars, and there'd be little phones that you can hold in your hand, and you can talk to your son while he's working, and I would be so fucking healthy. It'd be incredible, because I'd be 172 and still trucking. I'm pretty excited about it all now.
So we live in the future now, is what you're saying?
I think so. Isn't it like it all comes together, the past, the present, and the future?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking.
So linear time is really an illusion.
I would guess. That's what they told me in third grade.
Grammy, do you have an idea for the future of cities?
Oh, I just hope everything will be okay.
We hope Trump is not president.
Okay. Right. That's not that we won't have a future. So we hope everything's okay. That's good. So a utopia.
Why not? Why not?
At least it could be like, honestly, I picture lots of places to walk, and there's a lot of children around, and concerts and ice cream, and just happy.
It's just a big party. It's just, life is so good. So good. So happy.
All right, guys. Thanks for being guests on Radio Spaetkauf. I'll call you back later. Okay. Anything you guys want to plug? It's going to be tough to, but the show notes, we will have links to, I forgot to mention, Aiki has a podcast, an amazing podcast examining the science fiction radio shows of the past from our perspective today. Just a must listen. You also have an event coming up in Berlin at Other Lands, right?
Yeah, on the 14th of December in the Everland Bookshop. If anyone wants to come, we are talking about how we want to live in the future, global, local.
All right.
Yeah. So
auf Deutsch.
Yeah, it's in German.
It's fine, but basically, I'll just say you'll get it if you were here. You can just word for word. It's the same thing. Max, if we're looking, I don't know the plug here. For you. Where should people find out more about your work?
Come to visit our studio if you pass by Leipziger Straße. We have a dome you can sit in and experience and fly through these urban futures in an immersive way.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, there's rides. I didn't know the architects had that. I like the little models. You've got it to the next level.
No.
Okay.
We're like we work with Unreal Engine, like the gaming software we work a lot with, and immersive technologies. And Sergey, who is our creative director, basically, he lives in Unreal Engine, and he's shooting out movies one or the other. So yeah, come by. If you want to see, more than welcome in Leipziger Straße, and everything's going to be okay, as your mom said.
It would be great if it was. Then thank you both so much for joining us today. This was I've been looking forward to this all week, and this has been fantastic. So thank you so much for your inspiration for the future, and give yourselves a round of applause also for coming out. And I want to thank Podigy for hosting us, Europäische Akademie Berlin, and everyone who supports Radio Spaetkauf. Thank you all.
This event is part of a project, Europe Behind the Headlines, which is a cooperation between the European Academy Berlin and the podcast Radio Spaetkauf, Berlin's news in English.
Radio Spaetkauf. Berlin news in English.